Hey guys, this is Brian Mounts. We're in the Turf Mechanic brand. Today I want to talk to you about when to start fertilizing the lawn in the spring. It's really as simple as that. The lawn that you see behind me is a mixed bag of some cool season grass and some warm season grass. Our soil temperatures around here are around 55 degrees right now, so a lot of this stuff is growing. Not to beat around the bush, but rule of thumb is you're not going to be fertilizing your lawn ever at all unless your grass is already green. But it doesn't have to be 100% green. Now you ask 10 different professionals, they'll give you 10 different answers. My opinion is that if your grass is roughly 30% green, then it should be ready for fertilizer if you want to do it. However, there's more to be said about the topic, which is why I want to make this video. Everyone asks this question. So let's throw out a few scenarios here. If you live in a northern climate where you tend to get pretty good harsh winters, by the time spring rolls around, you've got cold season grass, and that means your grass is actually going to start greening up and coming out of winter dormancy before soil temperatures get to 55 degrees. Most cool season grasses like perennial rye, Kentucky bluegrass, and fescues, these grasses are going to start greening up when soil temperatures are in the mid to upper 40s. Essentially, you're going to be mowing the grass before the ground under the grass is warm. So if you run off to any big box store and pick up whatever fertilizer happens to be there, most of those fertilizers use a product called urea or some form of urea in it. And although the grass does respond really quickly to urea-based fertilizers, the soil temperatures actually have to be warm enough to transform those nutrients into plant available nitrogen. So the nitrogen that goes down onto the lawn isn't really going to push green up or growth if you apply it to cold soil. So although a cool season territory lawn might be starting to look green in the month of March, not all fertilizers that are applied to that lawn at that time of year are going to do anything. Now, just kind of across the board, I tend to push people to not fertilize in the early parts of spring at all, unless you've got a very thin lawn. So as you see behind me, this doesn't look thin, but it actually is pretty thin. What you're seeing back there is a lot of winter weeds mixed into the grass. So in the very near future, I'm going to be killing off a lot of those winter weeds. So once those winter weeds die, we're talking mostly it's poana. Now, poa is basically an annual bluegrass, but that doesn't mean that it's a grass that I want in the lawn because it dies in the middle of the summer and it just leaves all the dirt. So what I'm going to end up doing is killing that off, and then I'm going to have a whole bunch of bare dirt. So I am fertilizing in the early parts of spring to push growth in the desirable grasses in this lawn, which in this particular lawn, most of it that I want to keep, or at least for the time being, is Kikuyu grass. This is a Southern California lawn. Kikuyu grass isn't found very many places around the United States. However, Arizona, Hawaii, Southern California, you're going to find it everywhere. But here's the thing, if I didn't have a whole bunch of poa in the lawn and my lawn was already fairly thick with the actual desirable grass type, I wouldn't be fertilizing right now at all. And that's especially true for warm season grasses. Now, Kikuyu is a warm season grass, but it is I don't know, it's a grower at the lower temperatures for the warm season grass category. Most warm season grasses, like your St. Augustines and your Bermudas and zoysias and whatnot, these things aren't going to be growing when soil temperatures are 50 to 55 degrees. We bottomed out this past winter with about 48 degree soil temperatures, and most of the Kikuyu just kept on going the whole time. Not all of it, but most of it did. Warm season grasses really are just going to go dormant. They're just going to go brown once soil temperatures drop to about 55 degrees or lower. So that means in early spring, a lot of these things aren't ready to grow yet. Because it does take a long time for soil temperatures to warm up. I mean, the air outside could be 70 degrees, but if the soil hasn't gotten up that high, it doesn't matter. The fertilizer isn't going to push growth. It doesn't bring grass out of dormancy. You have to wait for that grass to come out of dormancy on its own. Now, another thing that I have regularly advised my viewers to do is to fertilize in the very early spring, but only if you're using a natural source of nitrogen. And by a natural source of nitrogen, I'm talking about something made out of soybean meal or blood meal or feather meal or alfalfa meal, or it could be a biosolid like Milorganite or one of the Milorganite clones. And these products also need to get broken down in the soil, but if you put them down early, you're not going to lose the nitrogen. So urea going down onto a cold lawn is going to eventually gas off. The volatilization process, you're going to lose a lot of the nitrogen to the atmosphere. So it's kind of wasteful. If you're putting down a water-soluble kind of like a sodium nitrate or an ammonium sulfate, then these are products that will go into the lawn because they're water soluble and they'll just keep leaching down. So if the grass isn't green and growing yet, if it's not ready to take up that fertilizer and put it to work, then you're going to end up wasting a lot of that fertilizer as well to the groundwater, to the subsoil below your root zone. So early spring fertilization, the best way to do it, in my opinion, especially if your lawn isn't green and growing yet, is to put down one of these natural sources of nitrogen. In years past, my go-to has always been Milorganite. A lot of people don't like Milorganite because it's a biosolid, but it's readily available everywhere across the country. It's getting a little bit more pricey than it used to be, but it's still a pretty good option. However, it does contain a lot of phosphorus, and people also don't like that. So another good option for people who want to put down something like that, but they also want the convenience of finding something that you can just pick up at a big box store somewhere, is Scott's Natural Lawn Food, Scott's Natural Lawn Care. I have a video on the channel here all about that one particular product. It's actually one of my favorite ones. I believe it's an 11-2-2, so you're not getting too much phosphorus, and you're getting a little bit of potassium in there, and all of the nitrogen comes from natural sources. It's a pretty good product, and you're not going to waste any of those nutrients over time. Now, if you're an oddball character like myself, I got a warm season lawn that's not dormant, but the soil temperatures are still on the low side. And I'm about ready to start killing off a whole bunch of weeds and open up a bunch of bare dirt in the middle of the lawn. I need to push growth quickly. So what I ended up doing was taking a product from the Lawn Box company, something called Grass Genie. Trying to remember the ratio off the top of my head. It's a 10:06, and most of that 10% nitrogen is sodium nitrate, which is a water-soluble nitrogen source that can go down into the lawn very quick and easy and be uptaken. It doesn't have to be broken down by soil microbial life, so it can just get sucked right up into the plant and go to work even at these cooler temperatures. So that's basically going to be pushing the Kikuyu grass that's here in the lawn, and then the spotty bits of fescue that's also here in the lawn. But mostly it's going to be pushing that Kikuyu grass to thicken out earlier in the season than it would otherwise. As the weeds die off, that Kikuyu will just spread right into the spaces, and hopefully there will be almost a seamless transition where the lawn pretty much stays green and full through the whole spring, but the weeds are replaced by grass. Now up north, most of those grass types aren't going to spread nearly as quickly. Kentucky bluegrass can spread, and if you push it with a ton of nitrogen, it will spread on the quicker side, but I don't like putting down excessive amounts of nitrogen. Typically, you're going to be doing an overseeding in northern climates if you have a very thin lawn. Now, I do suggest fertilizing to thicken up those lawn spaces. I do have videos all about how to fix a thin lawn. Again, I guess I'll put some links to some of those videos down in the description below. But if your lawn isn't that thin, then there's no reason to fertilize in the early parts of spring. The spring flush happens naturally and the grass will start growing. Your time, energy, and money will be better used to prevent weeds from germinating in the spring instead of fertilizing and overseeding. You really kind of only do one or the other. If you do want to put some grass seed down and fertilize heavy, but still stop the weeds, then you could go out of your way and find a product that uses mesotrione in it. There's Tenacity. There are generic versions of Tenacity, which are liquid, sprayable mesotrione products. I think there's some other new stuff on the market, which I'll link to down below, that you can just pick up on Amazon. But over at your local big box store, you'll end up finding Scott's starter fertilizer with mesotrione in it. It says built for seeding on it. That's an option as well if you just want to run down to your local store. But for seeding in the month of March and the early parts of April, it's actually pretty hard to seed quickly because ground soils are cold. Southern grass types where the ground soils are warmer could germinate seed a lot faster, but they would be germinating cool season grass seed, which most warm season lawns aren't going to be wanting to put down cool season grass seed into their lawn. And you don't really overseed warm season lawns with grass seed in the early spring anyway. There's a lot of these like competing things that just don't 100% make sense, and it all funnels back to most people shouldn't be fertilizing in the early parts of spring. The first fertilizer of the year for the typical lawn that's fairly well maintained is going to be in the mid-spring time frame, unless you're putting down those natural sources of fertilizer early on in the season so that you don't have to worry about it later when you're just in your regular mowing pattern. Typically somewhere around like mid-April, mid to late April, you could start thinking about pushing some pushing some regular fertilizer into the lawn, no matter what kind it is, because it will be used, but your grass is already growing gangbusters. So do you really want to push it then? This is when it's really easy for me to dovetail into the why are we pushing unnecessary growth? When we put fertilizer on the lawn, we are making the grass grow. Now the fertilizer does help the grass get into a more deeper, richer color of green. It helps it spread laterally, helps bunch type grasses tiller out and kind of get thick. But it also pushes more top growth. And if grasses are growing gangbusters in the spring, do you really want to mow more often? At some point during the spring, you should fertilize because the lawn does need to have those nutrients to stay extremely healthy. But it really needs to be kind of a balanced, not necessarily a balance like a 10-10-10 kind of a thing, but it's got to be across the spectrum, a little bit of all nutrients and some micronutrients. Micronutrients are the thing that most casual lawn owners never think to put on their lawn. So if you can find yourself a fertilizer that has micronutrients in it, that has a lower concentration of nitrogen, my preferred ratio is an 8-to-5. 8-to-4s are pretty good, but that last number, the potassium number, you got to have a good amount of that in there. I really suggest finding some way of getting, if you're putting 2 parts of nitrogen down, you should be putting 1 part of potassium down every time. The potassium is really going to help your lawn stay healthy. And so long as that nitrogen content is on the lower end of the spectrum, you're not going to be pushing unnecessary growth. So with all that said, I put down the Grass Genie product, which is a 10-06, no phosphorus, plenty of potassium in relation to the nitrogen content. The nitrogen in that product is going to go to work fast on my lawn and help the desirable grass spread laterally. Next spring, when I have thick grass, I'm not going to need that grass to spread laterally. So I'm not going to be applying fertilizer in the month of March. I'm going to be waiting a little bit later on, and instead of fertilizing for growth, I'll be adding products to the lawn to improve the growing environment. Once the lawn is thick and healthy, then I want to keep it healthy. I want to give that stuff vitamins. I don't want to make it grow way too much. For those of you who really need like hard numbers and dates, a good rule of thumb is you don't need to fertilize your lawn, no matter where you live, until probably around the mid part of April. If you got an extremely thin lawn and you want to thicken it up as fast as possible during the spring growing season, then yeah, go ahead and put down something that is water soluble in the early part of the season. Once you've got at least 30% green up, because as I've said in many videos before, at the end of winter dormancy, the root systems of your grass wake up from dormancy before the upper canopy. So if you're starting to see about 30% green, then that means probably about 100% of the root systems, they're ready to go. If you watch this far into the video, make sure to watch this video next, which is how to take your bad lawn from last year and turn it into a good lawn this year. This is where you start, right there. Bad lawn, good lawn. Start there. Click the button, click the video, whatever it is. Watch that next. It will help you, I promise.